I want to talk today about how to be a less anxious leader.
The emotional maturity is the ability to regulate your emotions, which doesn't mean you don't have them.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you don't use them, but it means that you're in control of them.
It's fascinating that the times that we want to address it, calmness and anxiety, is like in the pinnacle of when we're realizing it in our leadership, which is like it's too late.
When we are calm, we affect the whole team. And one of the misconceptions about leadership is that leadership is something you do to somebody else, or you get somebody else to do.
Yeah.
In systems thinking, leadership has to do with you leading yourself. Typically, the less self-aware we are, the more other people are aware of what we're feeling.
What can I be doing to prepare for the anxious situations I will inevitably find myself in?
One of the things that squeezes us out is not allowing time.
Yeah.
One of our greatest enemies is busyness.
Tom,
Hey, Andrew.
how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. I'm excited to do this one.
Good, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can stew up something for us here.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I want to talk today about how to be a less anxious leader.
Good luck.
Are you saying it's impossible?
Yeah, just stay in your room,
Yeah,
and if you just eliminate all people from
that's
your
right.
life,
That's
and
right.
all,
Nobody will know.
you know, and if you sleep,
That's right.
if you sleep well, just don't wake
Good
up.
sleep. Good sleep. Don't
Yeah.
wake up. Don't see anybody, and
No.
you'll be less anxious. Nice. That's good.
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think we see that. I'll just use this as an analogy to start off talking about it, but you see it in sports, and particularly football, which is familiar, and particularly in Denver. There's a iconic moment with John Elway being the quarterback of the Broncos, and what he was known for there, was that very thing, being non-anxious in the midst of a chronic anxious setting.
Yeah.
So the setting that he's famous for, amongst a million of them, but we were playing the Cleveland Browns and for the AFC Championship, and we were down a touchdown, and we got the ball first. We got the ball on the 3-yard line, and there was no timeouts, and the clock was running, and so he ultimately drove down the field and hit a guy in the end zone for a touchdown,
Yeah.
which put it into overtime.
Extra time? Overtime?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What am I thinking of?
Isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
I think it's overtime.
Then
But
basketball.
you're asking the wrong person. I haven't followed football in a long time.
It was a tie. And
Yes,
so,
yeah.
Yes, and so it moved it
Yeah.
into a tie. Well, the reason it was famous is because some of it was just amazing that but he just was precision, like passing the ball and running, and one of the guys, Mark Schlereth, who was the offensive guard, and he's sort of famous here locally for being on the radio and national, whatever. He said that Elway said, "All right, guys, we got him right where we want him." And that became famous because the thing that allowed them to have confidence in their own part of the team was knowing that their leader, who was Elway, was not anxious. He said, he's cracking a joke, and that team went on to win the Super Bowl. So it's apropos for today, with the Super Bowl stuff coming up here in a couple
Yeah.
of weeks. But that picture is an example of what that looks like. So you've got all kinds of things going on around you. But I think one of the key things in how do you lead without being anxious is a couple principles, but one is just recognizing that whether it's your team or whether it's your family or whether it's your church or whatever you're leading, that there's a sense of calmness. And so how do you get that calmness? Does that mean that nothing else is going on? And,
Right.
and so that's the challenge. But it begins, I think, by understanding the dynamic of a team or a family, and that's a system. So it's what they call systems thinking versus linear thinking. Linear thinking, cause and effect are closely related. It's just on or off.
Right.
You're either right or wrong. You're, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so problem solving, so the things that might cause you anxiety as you're leading, a linear approach to that is just find out what's wrong with it and fix it. So that's sort of what we tend to do. But the reality is we are just like in a family and a team, we're a part of a system. And a system, everything affects everything. It's sort of like, I don't know if you've ever see a mobile that we used to make them in 8th grade or something.
What is it?
It's a mobile.
Mobile?
Mobile. It's like it's mobile.
Okay.
But what it
I don't know what it is.
it hangs and
Yeah.
it's got these little pieces there.
Yeah.
And so that it's designed so that it's kind of in motion. You'll see these things like that you
Interesting.
stick they'll have on a patio or something that's
Yeah.
moving, and the wind comes along
Yeah.
and it goes like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's a system is like that. So it's not static. It's not just sitting there like a shelf. It's various elements. And so
Yeah.
if you move that one, that moves this one, which moves that one, which moves that one. And so the thing that's intriguing about a mobile is that it's sort of from an artistic standpoint, it's kind of always
Right.
moving.
Yeah.
So when you think of systems versus linear, so the system would be, say, we're a part of a team, and like in the Broncos, or you can apply it to your office, you can
Yeah.
apply it to your family, etc. That when one part of the system changes, whether it's welcome change or not, it affects the whole system. And so one of the things and by the way, a recommendation of a book that has been central to this whole thinking is called A Failure of Nerve
Yes.
by Edwin
Yep.
Friedman. And by
It's
the
a
way,
deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not an easy read.
no, it isn't. In fact, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But one thing that comes with it, I don't know if when you ran into it, I don't know if I recommended to you or Kelly did.
Yeah,
or-
Kelly's talked about it a bunch.
But there's a 5-minute video available called Differentiated Leadership.
Oh, I haven't watched
And
that.
it's a 5-minute kind of almost cartoony summary
Yeah.
of the thing.
Oh, okay.
But what it's talking about is, back to your question of how do you remain calm?
Yeah.
And
Well, is that the opposite? I guess that's a question that I have is the opposite of anxious like a peace or a calmness? It was interesting.
yeah,
One of the identifiers of a non-anxious leader is confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, what is the other side of an anxious leader?
well, I think it's an inside-out thing.
Okay.
The calm has to be on the inside. It's and that ultimately is what allows you to remain calm, is that you're not basically being directed or by what's outside of you. So and a confidence is more of a byproduct than a primary product. In
Gotcha.
other words, you can be non-anxious and still be not confident
Totally.
because you can address your
Yeah.
reasons that you're not confident. In fact, that's an example of non-anxiety, because if you're not confident in something, the tendency is to be anxious. So one of the marks of being able to be non-anxious is, I don't know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and I know there's a lot at stake, and you could say, in a sense, I've got a right to be anxious, but I'm not. Okay, why? Why are you not?
Yeah.
Well, it's a matter of how you look at things. So if
Okay.
you look at it from the outside in, or even if you're looking inside and you're being directed by things outside of you, circumstances that you have no control over.
Yeah.
So one of the adages in systems thinking is that you focus on what you can do, not what you can't. And so what we're prone to do is just the opposite. What we can't make anybody like us. We can't make our subsidiary organization so there's the two questions you ask in systems analysis. One is, what is my role in the dysfunction of the system or the team? What am I doing? So for example, I'm the CEO of this company, and there's a lot of stuff going on, and I come in for the staff meeting, and it's clear that I'm anxious. And everyone's speculating, well, what's wrong with him? And by the way, this is something we can talk about down the road, but that's the whole role of nonverbal communication. So the verbal communication or the external communication is connected to the internal. So in other words, I may think I'm not being anxious, or I might be very aware of being anxious, but because I'm aware of it and how it impacts the rest of the system, it allows me to regulate it. But if I'm not aware that I'm feeling it, it's one of the statements in the systems thinking, and particularly around emotional maturity. And that's one of the things that Friedman talks about. The emotional maturity is the ability to regulate your emotions, which doesn't mean you don't have them.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you don't use them, but it means that you're in control of them. And the little adage is that theoretically an emotional, mature person, and by the way, another book that I recommended, there is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And he's sort of the progenitor of that whole idea that it's not IQ that causes people to succeed, but it's EQ, which is emotional quotient. How are you able to regulate, be in touch with, feel your own emotions? So the statement in that context is that we should know what we feel before anybody else does. And that's a mark of emotional maturity. If I don't know, so when I walk into the meeting and I'm saying, hi everybody, I hope everybody had a good time.
Yeah, right.
Let's get to our thing. You could feel in the room the anxiety.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on except for the boss is ticked.
Yeah.
In fact, it reminds me of a sort of a funny sort of illustration of that, back in the day where they would have these slave ships.
Yeah.
And you'd have like 40 guys rowing. You're down in this dungeon and it's just horrible, and they're chained, and that was kind of common.
Oh yeah, sure.
Then you had a slave master that would be kind of whipping them and all that. And as the story or the joke goes, the slave master comes to the galley and says, "All right, men, I've got some good news and some bad news." And they're stopping and they're thinking, okay, first of all, the good news. The the master's in a great mood today, and everyone, hey,
Yeah,
hey."
yeah.
So now the bad news, he wants to water ski.
Oh no.
Anyway, the way that his anxiety,
Yeah.
so he may create anxiety in everybody else, but he himself is detached from everybody else's emotions. So a part of, again, staying on the theme of how do you remain, and
Yeah.
of course one of the sequences there is remaining implies that you're already there. So it's a matter of how do you get calmness. Once you have it, how do you retain it?
Yeah.
What's been your experience? What triggers for you that question?
I mean, I think it's easy to it's fascinating because I would describe myself as sometimes moody as like a leader. There's a lot going on, a lot changing, and so things that work that did work are broken. Things that are, it's like it just feels like there's so much out of my control, and yet I find myself still thinking about things that are outside my control. Like it just as a default. And it's interesting because as leadership has almost prided themselves on that type of thinking, of being like, oh, I'm the person that thinks ahead. I'm like the futuristic thinker. But those are often always things that are outside of my control. So typically in the pressure cooker of business and needing to find breakthrough and not feeling like you have control over what the future is, even though you're being seen as the person who's a great strategic thinker. It cultivates a lot of anxiety, because it's like, I don't know how to control this thing. But I think for me, kind of on the younger professionals side of things, I think it's more, I don't even know what the right answer is. And I don't know what the alternative is. Maybe there's like, I know exactly what this is, and that's why I was talking about confidence a little bit. It's like, if I was way more confident, would I be way less anxious? Because I feel like I look at the future and it's like, I mean, there's good thinking and good questions, but I genuinely have no idea the right thing that's going to drive the business forward. And so then it's like, then you have all the what ifs and all the frustrations.
So it's an insecurity.
Probably, yeah.
That if I don't know
the answer,
how to do something, or what direction it's going to go.
Yeah, and I have a whole team.
Yeah.
Like relying on me to have the right answer.
Well, and I think, that's a good scenario to look at, because one of the key things of our conversation about calmness is that when we are calm, we affect the whole team.
Yeah.
And one of the misconceptions about leadership is that leadership is something you do to somebody else. Or you get somebody else to do.
Yeah.
In systems thinking, leadership has to do with you leading yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm processing here, in that context. So the calmness comes as a byproduct of self-awareness. I'm aware that I'm scared, I'm anxious, I'm angry. So therefore, I take charge of that. So I don't let my emotions control me.
Yeah.
And and that doesn't mean my feelings. Feelings and emotions are different things.
Explain more, please.
Well, a feeling is a superficial thing. I mean, and you don't have any control over. You have no control over your feelings. That's just something I feel.
What like a reactive type
like they say, there's kind of 4 basic feelings.
I don't know this.
In terms of self-awareness, mad, sad, glad, or scared.
Mad,
so you're
sad,
either, and
glad,
mad
scared.
is when something happens that you didn't want to happen.
Okay.
Sad is, or mad is when someone's done something, but it's other. But you might be mad at yourself too, or but there's mad, and then there's sad. Sad is when something you didn't want to happen happened. Glad is when something you wanted to happen happened, and then scared is the feeling of fear. Okay, so
Yeah.
the what that can do is give sort of a toolbox to pay attention and become more self-aware of what self-aware meaning emotionally aware.
Yeah.
So and one of the ways to do that is having it's sort of like in when I was in college, I was a fine arts major, and
Yeah.
so painting, drawing, and all that stuff, and we learned the color wheel. I don't know if you're
Yep.
familiar
Yeah.
with it.
Very much so.
Okay, so there's three basic colors:
Yeah.
red, yellow, and blue, and everything else is a combination of that. So if you want to know, if you look at this right there and you say
Right.
that's gray,
Right.
is that a yellow gray or a blue gray? Well, if you're trained to know that's either it came from some combination, it's mostly yellow, then I understand that. Okay, so when I'm trying to understand what am I feeling, having this toolbox, so and they mix. So I might be sad because this didn't happen, and I also might be afraid because it didn't happen. I'm going to lose my job,
Yeah.
and because I'm going to lose my job, I'm
Angry.
I'm angry.
Yeah.
You know. And so the idea of it is to, first of all, identify what you're feeling and think about, because here's the reality with nonverbal communication. Typically, the less self-aware we are, the more other people are aware of what we're feeling.
Yeah.
So if you came, men are infamous for not doing this very well,
Right.
not exclusively, but so you come home from work and your wife says, you know, how'd it go today? And it's fine. And, well, I made the deal. Oh, how'd you feel? I don't know, I made the deal.
Yeah.
So, but ideally, you'd say, I'm going into this, I'm really disappointed, and I'm really scared, and you know, whatever those combinations. And so that gives somebody else it kind of corroborates what they're already thinking.
Yeah.
And so the opposite is when, you know, you're clueless, and everybody in the meeting is going,
They all know.
yeah, you know, and so you can't really, even if you're authentic, you can be authentically stupid. You know, so in other words, I really don't know what I'm feeling. And that's authentic. Say, well, I really know and I really capture it, and everyone's going, no, you haven't. Okay, so all of those things coming back to calmness, to me, the key word in that is congruence. And that means that your outside is congruent with your inside.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of the anxiety comes when that's out of sync.
Yeah.
You know, I'm feeling this, but I'm acting this, and I'm doing this, as opposed to having it's coming from the inside out, and there's a congruence that what's going on the inside is congruent with what's on the outside. You know, there's a common theme that, you know, that talks about the busy world we live in and complicated, and I need to simplify my life. Okay, and so that's an idea, and we run with it. But for me, the thing that causes anxiety is what is called duplicity. And duplicity means I'm trying to be different things to different people. So I'm a different person around my coworkers
Yeah.
than I am my boss, than I am my wife, than I am, and it doesn't mean that you don't feel those differences, but there's the congruence is my inside. I know what I'm feeling, and I'm able to express even my anger without having it escalate. So one of the things that Friedman talks about is in a organization that's dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Is what he compares chronic anxiety which versus acute anxiety. So chronic anxiety is sort of like gas that's in the air. You can kind of feel it, smell it. You rarely see it, but it's there, and you can feel it when you're sometimes when I'm consulting, I'll go to a staff meeting, and you can just feel like when the CEO comes into the room.
Yeah.
There's a tenseness.
Yeah.
That's on the easiest of it. As it expands. There's a chronic. You go to work at a place and it just doesn't feel good. There's anxiety. And because it's chronic, we tend to not be able to identify it.
Right.
In fact, we even ignore it. You see it in a family where the dad is an alcoholic and the mother is coping it this way, and they hold back. And if you go into that family, you can just feel there's something wrong, and the chronicness of it makes it harder to deal with. Acute anxiety is more akin to what we think of anxiety, and that means it's easier to deal with in that it has a beginning and an end, and it's more linear. Acute. So if my car's stalled out in the middle of I-25 at rush hour, and there's a big old truck coming.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to be anxious. I should be anxious, and that's sort of the fight or flight. But we confuse the two because the anxiety that's acute is something that we can spot, and we can, you by nature are going to go one way. It's going to have an ending to it.
Right.
I'm going to get run over by the truck, and then I'll be dead, and my anxiety goes away. But I have to do something, and I can do something. Whereas in the chronic, the problem is that it's hard to identify. But the characteristics of a chronic anxiety, a chronic organization that Friedman talks about, one of them is what he calls triangulation, emotional triangulation. And that means rather than individuals dealing with conflict, so I don't like you or we've got something going on,
right?
We don't deal face to face. We go to a third person. We go to, it might even be another person in your office. And you go, can I talk to you about something? Do you think Susie is really a jerk? Yeah, and you talk it through, and you think, well, now I've done something. I've really helped because I talked to somebody else. I feel much better. The conflict never gets dealt with.
Right.
The person that's being triangulated over here actually gets worse because he or she now is carrying this new information that's your problem.
Right. Yeah.
It's not my problem.
Yeah.
So one of the characteristics of an anxious organization is that there is that triangulation. And it's huge.
Oh, huge, yeah.
If you just took that alone out of the office, where if you've got a conflict with somebody, go talk to them.
Oh, man. How much politics and office drama would be solved in just that,
But there's something that doesn't like that because of our own insecurity. And our own lack of confidence, a failure of nerve. We don't step out because we're not confident in who we are.
It's our own anxiety not dealt with. Triangulation happens, and then the culture sacrifices. It becomes anxious at the cultural level. I'm curious. So it sounds like there's like an identification of your own what you're feeling and identifying that and exploring that and being able to, in many ways, not control it, but begin to set it aside so that you can lead differently. It's like the acknowledging and then moving past it. What are some other ways that you've seen leaders healthfully become less anxious? How do you fuel a sense of calmness or peace? Like, what are some other things that healthy leaders do for that to be a consistency in their leadership?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is your own self-care, by taking time to think about your life, to think about this stuff, which we are prone not to.
Yeah.
We just keep going.
Just keep moving.
And the same things keep on derailing us. The same mystery in our heart. How come nobody likes me? How come my boss always yells at me? And so one of the characteristics, another characteristic of the chronically anxious organization is blame shifting. People don't take responsibility for their own stuff. And so it's somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, so some of the way to answer your question a little more specifically, the way we do that is by being aware of these dynamics and then doing some things we can't, so again, the question is, what can I do?
Yeah, yep.
And not what, but our tendency is to say, what can you do to change?
Yeah.
So the question is, what can I do and then what can I change? So a part of what I can change, even in this process of identifying, how do I contribute to triangulation, for example? That's the question. Our tendency is to not even look at it that way.
Yeah.
It's to blame shift. And another one of the characteristics of the chronic organization, chronically anxious, is what Friedman calls herding, like cows that get herded. In other words, we don't deal with conflict. The way we do it is we get 3 other people. So out of triangulation, it kind of accumulates.
Yeah.
Now when we go to talk to that person or go to talk about it, we say, a bunch of us have been noticing this about you. Oh, really? Well, which bunch? And who? And so the organization, doesn't get that way. I mean, in other words, it doesn't have that maturity to say, well, who are you talking about?
Right.
And not even to get them, but to say, so you all have been meeting together and you've decided this about me? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
And by confronting the stuff, head on with the confidence, and that's the failure of nerve. When we're not aware of that, then we lack nerve. We lack the confidence to move forward.
Yeah.
So the herding, the triangulation are kind of bedfellows.
Yeah.
But also the organization, the family or the team or whatever, one of the things that's characteristic of a dysfunction is it escalates. Conflict escalates. It doesn't stay calm.
Right.
It,
yeah.
It kind of goes round by round. Oh, yeah? Well, that's right. Oh, you really so? Oh, really? And it's sort of like kids in the playground. At least when I was somebody come up and push you like that.
Yeah.
And you never push back at the exact same.
No.
Or for sure
just
not
a little
less.
bit harder. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's boom. In fact, in the Old Testament, one of the things that one of the laws, kind of the Mosaic laws, was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So out of context, that sounds sort of barbaric. If you poke my eye out. But actually that means justice in that context, because the tendency is you poke my eye out, I cut your arm off.
Yeah, right.
You cut my arm off, I blow up your village. I mean, if you couldn't get a better example of what's going on in our world right now with all the wars.
Yeah.
With Israeli and Palestine and with Ukraine and Russia. It's like one pushes the other one, et cetera. So that's a sign, a healthy emotional organization deals with conflict.
Hmm.
It doesn't triangulate.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the opposite of the bad stuff invigorates. Now, I'm not good at this. Some of it, I've had to learn it and work on it. And being the CEO of several different organizations, by the way, the self-awareness, I think it can't be done alone.
Right.
You need somebody else or people with you. So
Hmm.
when I was first kind of learning this and applying it, and I'd come into my team meeting, which was a staff of about 10 or 12 people, executive stuff, I would say, I'm doing this and I need help with it, and I have no clue what my nonverbal thing is.
Yeah.
And so at the end of a meeting, I would ask them, how did I do?
Hmm.
And you kind of raised your voice and like in my group, the women responded in a real strong negative way when I raised my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, because my self-awareness was low, I wasn't mad.
Right.
I mean, if I'm excited about something,
Yeah.
I raise my
Yeah,
voice.
Totally. Hmm.
But for them, it was like, it's almost abusive,
Hmm.
from their perspective.
Yeah.
And so in order for me to get, it's hard to be calm when you don't have control over something.
Yeah. Right.
It's one of the things that was amazing with Jesus on the boat with the disciples,
Hmm.
and there's a storm going on, and they're anxious.
Yeah.
And what Jesus did was just came and stepped inside the boat,
Hmm.
and the seas were calm, and then they were calm. And when he was gone, they were anxious.
Hmm.
Okay, so as a leader, it doesn't mean that you're Jesus, but you
Yeah, right.
learn like that.
Yeah.
So of understanding how, because the sort of the emotional intelligence piece, the first part is self-awareness.
Hmm.
So that's what we're talking a lot about. How do I get in touch with what's going on in my insides? So if you can't do that, which it's a work in progress, then you can't regulate it.
Hmm.
When it'd be like giving you a gun,
Right.
and you kind of, what? Am I hurting somebody?
Yeah,
Well, you
right.
just killed 3 people here. Okay, I don't want to do that. So what do? You learn the power of the gun, and you learn how to regulate it. You learn to be careful around the trigger,
Mm-hmm.
because that'll do that. So it's the same thing, with our life and in our relationships in a organization. So where the calmness comes from strength, not weakness. You can be calm on the outside,
Yeah.
but and be anxious on the inside, and eventually that takes over. And then so now, rather than dealing with it, so there's this guy in the office that I've needed to talk to for
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I had 2 guys in my office, literally, that were, one was there for they were both there for a long time.
Right.
And because I didn't have the nerve to really talk to them about things that they were doing that were not destructive physically, but just their attitudes. They worked there for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And I fueled it as this chief executive and everybody knew that, and we'd have meetings and they're just kind of, but I would never do anything about it.
Yeah. Right.
So there was an incongruence. Somebody needed to step into it. And then when I did, it was painful, but it was right.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I did and took the leadership on that. There's another adage that you can't delegate leadership.
Mm-hmm.
You can delegate tasks. You can delegate, projects.
Yeah.
But leadership, if you are the leader, you have to lead. And all these things are connected to leadership in terms of systems, knowing yourself, So the second part of the emotional intelligence is the ability is to pay attention to how you impact others. The first part is you just being aware
Yeah.
of what's going on
Yeah. Yeah.
and learning how to regulate that.
Yeah.
But I can learn about that, okay, I get really mad at stuff. And you'll see this where people will just justify it by saying, well, that's just me.
Sure.
You know, I'm
yeah.
Irish, and, you know, when we get mad, we get mad.
Right.
And instead of saying, well, no, in a emotionally mature organization, you confront that. Say,
Yeah.
Bob, you know, that didn't work for us. I get it that you're Irish, but even that is a symptom of blame shifting.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
saying I didn't do anything wrong. I just was born into a bunch of Irish guys.
Sure.
You know, so you move from the self-awareness to the other awareness. How do
Right.
I impact people? And that's what I was alluding to
Yeah.
before when I ask people,
Yep.
how did I come across there? I mean, think of the power for good if and by the way, it's something you have to lead. It's not something you assign. You know, you need to work on that and
Right.
get back to me. So the third thing is learning, which we talked, how to regulate it.
Yeah. Right.
And there again, that's for the most part, it's awareness then discipline. You know, in other words, I'm aware that I'm doing that, but now how do I stop doing that? And do I really want to stop? You know, so those kind of internal conversations, if we don't set apart time to think of that, if we are not intentional
Right.
about that, and the intentionality also comes with being a part of a team.
Right.
And so, you know, on the team, there's a desire to get better. One of the things that I've appreciated about Sanders, prime time, he, you know, he's got a ton of adages and all kinds of stuff.
Sure.
But he says there's a common one that says there's no I in team, which is true. But he says there is an I in win. And what he means by that, and I thought it was profound, and it tying in here, is that if you want to be for the team, you need to be the best you can. So in order to have a team that wins,
Right.
you're responsible for getting better at whatever position you're playing. It's not the coach's responsibility. It's not your teammates' responsibility. You're taking charge. You're taking ownership of your own life.
Right.
And that's in his acronym, the I in the win. And it's sort of like the thing in the airplane, you know, where the thing says it comes down. If the oxygen comes down,
Yeah.
put it on yourself
Yeah.
first,
Yeah.
then your baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you think in terms of that, something's going on, instead of focusing on fixing the other person or even empathizing with them, while you're not paying attention to this.
Yeah.
So
Huh.
those are all kind of woven in and out there of how to be calm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So there's the self-identification piece of what am I feeling? Can I kind of own that feeling so that I can kind of move on? Otherwise, it's going to fester and build, and eventually, no matter how hard you try to hide it, it's coming out.
Yeah, it is.
There's a reflecting of how that's impacting the team, and assessing how those actions and those emotions and even just tone of voice and communications impacting the team. And then we were getting to a little bit of how do you control that. So I guess that's still where I'm
Sure.
curious is like what can I be doing? We got into you mentioned lifestyle. It's like what can I be doing what can we? Ooh, it's like if leadership is the game, what can I be? How can I be doing great at practice?
Yeah.
It's like what can I be doing to prepare for the anxious situations I will inevitably find myself in?
Well, that's a good insight, and I remember a friend of mine had a NASCAR team, so I went to NASCAR races and was on the sideline in the pits with all these Furniture Row, and they ended up winning 2 years. They won with Martin Truex, but I got sort of when I'd go to these races, you're down in the pit and everybody's got T-shirts with stuff on it. They're either their brand or whatever. And I remember one jumping out because I was never around NASCAR or anything like that. The only reason I was because my friend bought the team. But began to see that the NASCAR and all those racing, you call them racing teams.
Yeah.
You focus on the driver.
Sure.
But you see the guys that come out and change the tires and do all that. Well, they have 36 people on the team for this race. And like they have 2 guys that do nothing but just check the air pressure and the tires. And then they got, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the teams that win are ones that work together. And working together means everybody knows what they're expected to do. And they put their, as they say, be a star in your role.
Sure.
But this, in being aware of that, then this T-shirt stood out to me. And the T-shirt said, many have the will to win. Very few have the will to prepare to win.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the question. You say, I want to be more aware, I want to be blah, blah.
Yeah, outside of my leadership, I want to be doing things to prepare me for the intensity of leadership.
And the hard part is the preparation.
Yeah.
In other words, the guys that do excel are ones that have practiced the most. What we think is they just are good at being a leader. Or they're just good at driving a car.
Right.
But and again, in sports, it shows up a little more clearly. But you hear people spending time, looking at the tape. After a game, they'll look and they'll spend 5-6 hours by themselves. Just look, and what are they doing? They're preparing for the situation.
Right.
They're not just, just saying, well, I hope I do well.
Right.
So to the point of, continuing that, what kind of preparation?
Yeah.
Well, to summarize, or at least to piggyback on it, one of them is just getting time to reflect on it. And really, there again, having internal honesty to say, you know what, I really don't care. Well, that's a good beginning spot because then at least you're owning it, or
Sure.
to say, let's flip, I really do care. Then have this self-conversation saying, okay, now you've got these steps that you've been instructed in. So what are you going to do about those? Do you build them into your schedule? Say, I really want to be a good father. Great. And that's kind of like the T-shirt. Many want to be a good father.
Yeah.
Few want to prepare to be a good father, or to be a good employee, or to be a good person, or to be So the thing that jumps out then is preparation is something, but one of the things that squeezes us out is not allowing time.
Yeah.
One of our greatest enemies is busyness. And this is something I've talked to your boss about, not uniquely to him, but it's been a subject. And that's the difference between speed and hurry. Our culture is plagued with hurry. And the difference is you can be going 70, 80 miles an hour on the freeway
Yeah.
and be calm.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
You're not hurrying.
Yeah.
Conversely, you can be going 5 miles an hour and you're hurrying.
Yeah.
So a part of that, again, self-regulation is being in touch with that kind of thing. And so I don't make time to even think about my life.
Right. Right.
You know, and then I don't, and one of the ways I can think about it is by asking others to help me. And then having asked them to help me, having, them help me carry it out. You know, if in sports, again, I have a lot of those illustrations, but I remember, one of the things that really helped me, I played football, basketball, and baseball. And all of them were things that I had to prepare for.
Yeah.
But it made it easier when, like if in football was the hardest in terms of conditioning, because in the off season we'd have to run wind sprints.
Right.
And we didn't have a coach around. We just had to do it. So, but if I had like 3 buddies were on the team together, that we would work out together. And we were doing it together. We had a common goal that we were trying to get better. So if you take that mentality and that picture and say, I really want to be a better employee. I want to be, but in this case, just calmer.
Yeah.
And a part of that, again, is awareness. So those are some kind of practical.
Yeah. It sounds like creating intentional space outside of the busyness and intensity of leadership to reflect, assess, and then invite community into that process. Just like going to the gym together and training. It's again outside of, I think it's like, it's fascinating that the times that we want to address it, calmness and anxiety, is like in the pinnacle of when we're realizing it in our leadership, which is like, it's too late.
Right.
It's already gone. It's like we've missed that. And so like I want to be diligent in wrestling with it earlier, and it sounds like doing that within community is a very healthy space to in some ways create accountability to navigating emotions consistently in a way that results in calmness.
Well, and when you do it together too, one of the things that keeps us from doing it together is fear of being found out. A vulnerability. So you go and you say we're going to do 100 push-ups. And so I find myself then not going at all because I can only do 10. And instead of saying, hey, you did 12, and we're encouraging, and we have strengths and weaknesses. And again, working as a team, coming back to that whole thing of how do you remain or get calm, how do you, and one thing that I think you'll see as you exercise that is the power of non-anxiety. In other words, as a leader, so you come into this really volatile situation, and instead of freaking out or just blaming people or saying it's never going to happen again, that there's a calmness that says this is the worst thing that's ever happened here. So what should we do? And you can just see the whole room, like. When I was pastor at church, we had 3 different instances where there was infidelity or there was moral failure. And a couple of them had to do with our youth ministry. And it was horrible. And everybody in the congregation knew. And there were, when this particular person confessed this going on, with a teenager in the church, and I got a phone call on it, and so I came back to the church. We had already had this guy arrested, and it was just, and in the parking lot were 3 news trucks, all saying here's the church, this church, and
Yeah,
this pastor, this person has been, and it was about as tense as you could imagine, and the next night we had a gathering of all the parents, 300 or 400 people, and we just talked about it.
Yeah.
But and what I brought to that, by God's grace and training and just whatever, was calmness. And it was be able to say, you know what, I take responsibility for this. I was the head guy. It happened on my watch. I'm sorry. We're going to do everything we can to avoid it. And then open up to questions. And but there was a calmness.
Yeah.
And that, by God's grace in my life had developed, and I had a couple other ones like that down the road that would be, usually split apart a church or an organization, and it did just the opposite. Because I was transparent and I was vulnerable, and I was calm.
Yeah.
If not fake calm.
Sure. Sure.
And so there's power.
Yeah.
For you and for your organization, whatever it is.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I think just to close, it's funny to me how oftentimes in my head as a leader, the thing that feels the most scared to do, and so I end up not doing it, ends up hurting far more than just entertaining, or it's like in the vulnerability sense. It's like by me not being vulnerable in that moment, or engaging in healthy conflict instead of triangulating, or trying to address the chronic nature of the anxiety in the culture, because I'm like, well, that's scary, that's vulnerable. Yeah. And so this is the safe route. The safe route is to not do any of that. Yeah. Ends up being far more worse than to just take it head on and do the thing that is the right thing to do.
It's sort of like just disease. If you think, well, if I go and get a check on cancer, oh, that's scary, and so I'm not going to. Yeah, right. And so that alleviates for right then, but then the cancer is allowed to grow and eventually, kill you. And the same thing, huge in organizations. There's cancers, and cancers they reproduce, but they also are, they suck the life out of stuff. Yeah. And so something that might be minor, if you'd have gone in and just nipped it, and that's where those things we talked about, triangulation and so on, when we don't do those, and then it's worse. Totally. So now you got an organization and no one even still works there. Totally. One of the, we don't have time to go into it, but maybe we can eventually, but that is the role of digital communication. In my opinion, it contrasts the good and the bad. The good, we can see, and there's a lot of good stuff going on, but one of the things that I did with my team was because I kind of made a rule that you couldn't use email or any kind of electronic communication for anything other than information. Yeah. And when we substitute it for face-to-face stuff, it's like little cancers going on. Oh, yeah. And it's inefficient.
When nobody knows the tone of your voice or the nonverbals or any of that stuff.
Yeah, trying to do emoji for your, and that, if you think about it, that's why emojis came around. Yeah, to try to express those things. You remember the original texting?
There wasn't any of that.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff we can talk about.
So much one more unpack, but I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks
You're
for
welcome.
The conversation.
Great being with you.
Yeah.